1. The scene opens with Iago and Roderigo mid-conversation talking about Desdemona. Iago mentions how Desdemona was married that same night to Othello. Roderigo gets uncontrollably mad because he was actually paying Iago to court them. Othello is a respected government official that happens to be one of the only African people in Venice at the time. While on the subject of Othello, Iago is also mad at him, but for a different reason. As it turns out, Othello is in charge of promotions, and unfortunately, Iago was passed over for a promotion he believes he earned. In Iago's eyes, he is worthy of the role, trained and experienced, unlike the man who was promoted to lieutenant, Michael Cassio. A Florentine was promoted over Iago, and Iago feels that Cassio, not being from Venice, has no experience and only knowledge in the manner of war. This makes Iago so incredibly mad that he doesn't begin to just question his loyalty to Othello, but he completely renounces it. Iago explains how he will follow to serve my turn upon him. He will wear my heart upon my sleeve, for daws to peck at. I am not what I am. Iago explains in that metaphor that he will pretend to display the utmost of loyalty, while he really isn't loyal at all. Moving on to the next section of Act 1, the scene shifts and Iago calls to alert Desdemona's father, Brabantio, as to her marriage. They walk to his house and call out, "Thieves! Thieves!" Brabantio appears at his window, asking why he was woken, without knowing who woke him. Iago begins to explain how his daughter was married, while not being totally clear. Iago's hate for Othello, driven by racial hatred, and Roderigo's love of Desdemona, is explained when they say, "An old black ram is tupping your white ewe. You'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse, and you'll have your nephews neigh to you." Not referring to Desdemona by her name, or Othello by anything, not using a racial insult, they try to tell Brabantio, while also trying to anger him, that his daughter was married. Eventually, they reveal themselves. We learn that Roderigo was told to stay away from Desdemona and their house. They soon convince Brabantio to at least check if she's in her bed. Brabantio comes back empty-handed and begins to summon his people. He sets off to apprehend Desdemona and Othello, while Iago asks not to be mentioned in order to appear loyal. In Brabantio's eyes, Des is a traitor to herself and her family. Act 2. Act 2 of Othello starts out similar to Act 1 in the way that it opens with Iago mid-conversation while talking in the street. Iago confides in Othello about I hold it very stuff o' the conscience, to do no contrived murder. I lack in equity, sometimes to do me service, 9 or 10 times, I had thought to have yerked him here under the ribs. Iago is explaining how he wants to kill someone out of anger. The reader knows, through dramatic irony, that Iago despises Othello, as he was passed over for the promotion. Iago confides in Othello about his internal struggle in order to show his trust. Othello stays reasonable, telling him that it's better to not kill someone. Iago goes on to lie, saying that they were insulting Othello. Iago drastically swaps conversation topics and immediately asks Othello if he was recently married. Iago warns him that Brabantio, the father of his presumed bride, will have them divorced, and potentially even Othello severely punished. Othello is confident that all of his positive actions for the city of Venice will outweigh Brabantio's claims in any court of law, and therefore he isn't worried. He uses Desdemona's name for the first time while explaining just how much he loves her. Suddenly, a number of lights appear further down the street. Iago advises Othello to hide, but he reckons hiding will make him seem dishonorable. As it turns out, it's actually Michael Cassio, the newly promoted lieutenant, that was approaching, and with drastic news. The Duke requested Othello's immediate presence as he would need his general in order to respond properly to a military threat in Cyprus. Eventually, Brabantio does arrive, wielding weapons along with officers. Othello advises him to lay down their weapons in order to peacefully work out their differences. Brabantio heard none of it. He's outraged about how, "Thou foul thief, where hast thou stowed my daughter? Damned as thou art, thou hast enchanted her, so opposite to marriage that she shunned the wealthy, curled darlings of our nation, to the sooty bosom of such a thing as though to fear, not to delight." Brabantio truly believes that Othello used magic on his daughter, as not even a rich, handsome man could ask her hand in marriage, and especially not someone like Othello, a dirty outsider despite his position. Othello manages again to respond in a peaceful manner and offers to take Brabantio to the Duke with him instead of on a separate trip. Brabantio agrees, thinking naturally that the Duke would deem them more guilty, and sets off. Act 3. Scene 3 opens in the middle of a serious discussion in the council chamber, with the Duke and many of his senators working to decide what happened in Cyprus. Many reports told different stories, but with all of them declaring that there is a military threat aimed for Cyprus. A sailor reported that the Turks are going to invade Cyprus. However, it was difficult to tell what was real and what wasn't. It was at this point that the Duke decides to put Othello, a general, on the island in case of an invasion. Cassio was sent for Othello, and Brabantio decided to come with them. Othello and Brabantio enter the chamber. The Duke greeted Othello and then turned to Brabantio, who happened to be a senator, and asked him why he wasn't there in the meeting already. Brabantio explains how he is terribly sad, so devastated that all of his other griefs were swallowed up. Brabantio explains how it was his daughter. Everyone, seeing the amount of sorrow he was in, immediately thought that she was dead. Brabantio explains how his daughter is dead, aye, to me. She is abused, stolen from me, and corrupted by spells and medicine. Being not deficient, blind, or lame of sense, sans witchcraft could not. Brabantio explained how his daughter was stolen from him, and by means of witchcraft corrupted. The Duke, admitting that the accusation sounded horrible, asked who did this to her. Brabantio points to this more, referring to Othello. The Duke, instead of immediately deeming Othello guilty, asks for his side of the story. Othello explains how he isn't the best with words, but he vows to be honest. Othello explains how he didn't steal Des, but won her. Brabantio immediately interjects, explaining how Desdemona is so different from Othello when it comes to race, age, ethnicity, and wealth, and above all, she is afraid of him. He says it must be witchcraft behind her drastic change. Othello says, "Send for the lady to Sagittary, and let her speak of me before her father. If you do find me foul in her report, not only take away, but let your sentence even fall upon my life." Othello asks for Des to back him up, and it is found that he lied. They can do whatever they want to him. While she is on her way, Othello explains how they fell in love. Brabantio would often invite Othello to visit and tell stories of his life, and not only Brabantio loved him. Desdemona would drop what she was doing in order to listen to Othello, and often felt bad for him. She eventually discussed how she wished for a man like Othello, and eventually they fell in love. Othello explains how she wished that heaven had made her such a man. She thanked me and bade me, if I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her. She loved me for the dangers I had passed. This is the only witchcraft I had used. The Duke essentially takes on Othello's side when he says that the story would probably win his daughter too. Desdemona arrives and is forced to choose between her father and Othello. She chooses Othello. Brabantio, adopting the term more to have a disrespectful term, gives up Desdemona to Othello. Brabantio explains how, "I here do give thee with all my heart, which, but thou hast already with all my heart, I would keep from thee. I am glad at soul I have no other child, for thy escape would teach me tyranny." Brabantio is not happy about it at all, but he gives up Desdemona to Othello. The Duke tells Brabantio that being upset over something that cannot change will only make the problem worse. Brabantio asks to move on to the state affairs. The Duke asks Othello what Cyprus is like, and Othello explains how war is comfortable for him compared to regular life. Othello then asks to take care of Desdemona when he is away. The Duke suggests that he stay with her father, but even Brabantio, Othello, and Desdemona all say no. Desdemona begs to go with Othello as she doesn't want to be home doing nothing. Othello asks the Duke if he can take her, and the truth that he will not be distracted. However, the Duke explains how he must leave tonight. Instead of having her come, Othello asks Iago to take care of her. The Duke agrees. However, Brabantio warns Othello that Desdemona might lie to him, as she easily lied to Brabantio. However, Othello completely ignores what he has to say. The scene shifts, and Roderigo explains just how sad he is, comparing a doctor to death. Iago suggests a plan to get Desdemona back. Roderigo is supposed to disguise himself, go to Cyprus, and then be there for Desdemona at the end of Iago's plan, which will be to spread rumors of affairs about Othello and his wife in order to separate them. If this works to plan, Roderigo will pay money to Iago, and Iago will be out of money. At the end of this, Othello will have revenge took upon him and his life ruined. That is Act 1 of Othello.